Hi, I'm Rigger. This is Your Right, and episode 7 of Ice Queendom has just dropped, so we're going to keep this train rolling and review it too. So, let's get started right away, because this was a very interesting episode. To me, it actually sort of dipped back into some of the more recognizable things about RWBY in a weird way, but also introduced us to some new cool stuff, so let's get straight into it. First off, let's talk about the fact that Jaune was always there with them. They implied he wasn't there with the last shot, but they changed it up on us just for a little joke. That's fine. That's funny. Actually, I saw a lot of discourse online with a lot of people upset that Jaune was involved, and this and that and back and forth. I'm not getting involved in that. But I do think it's interesting that the way that this episode decided to use him was very much back to his early volume self, being a lot more jokey of a character, but still very useful in this situation. He is one of the most useful characters in this episode, but he bumbles his way there. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was just interesting to see Jaune all the way back to that, whereas now in current times, he is mostly responsible. He just bumbles now here and there. Like when they need a little button for a scene, he'll do something funny, but for the most part, he's just as serious as everyone else. And he always was serious, but he's presented in a more comedic fashion here, again, just akin to his old self in those early volumes, which is just refreshing to see. And I do like a lot of the jokes they put in here with that, like playing on him having a cold, and they say it's probably the nightmare's influence, although when he does get warmer clothes and he does, be sort of given more warmth by the situation, it does lessen it a bit. So is it the nightmare? Is it just, him bumbling in the dream? Is it a bit of both? Who knows? But just little things like that. It's cute, it's fun. Jaune sliding down the hill on his shield and crashing at the end. These little things are cool. I just like these little character touches that just makes things a little more alive. And this show is, I'm treating it anyway, as just sort of meant to be fun, and it's fun to watch. I did find it incredibly interesting that when he first appeared, Jaune's sword and cape were extravagant and big, and he says, well, this is what she thinks of me, she must think that my, sword and outfit are unwieldy, I can't wield them. And the sword on his back is super intricate, and, it almost looks way too grand. It looks like some mythical sword. It's like Excalibur or something on his back. And you're sort of along with them for the ride there, where you're like, oh yeah, that is how Weiss sees him. But he also does just have his regular shield and sword, so it's strange that he also has this big sword. And when he does an attack with it, despite sort of bumbling the attack, it has a massive effect, so maybe this sword will come back. Maybe there's something else we don't see. Maybe, just a theory, I guess, that perhaps that Weiss has a suspicion that Jaune must be more than he appears, which is perhaps why Pyrrha is interested in him as a teammate, that kind of thing. So her mind has concocted perhaps some special weapon or special ability or some kind of manifestation that there's something special about him. Not necessarily that she thinks that, but she thinks that must be it. So she's just sort of found this answer. That's just speculation, but it's just that he also had his regular weapon. She didn't get the weapon wrong, she gave him an extra weapon. So it's just an odd thing, but oh well, keep going. Speaking of some of that early volume nostalgia, I also really felt that when we got to finally involving the train, which, felt like it was always going to happen, those repeated things that they're going to have to change and will come into play for the story. And as soon as they were fighting on the train, I got that warm feeling of nostalgia of it's good to see them in a good old train fight. But, much more volume 2 than Blake's fight in her trailer, despite that being what they reference. I also wanted to say that just for a quick second, they totally snuck some blood in here, which is pretty interesting. I went back and checked it, looks like blood, so that's pretty interesting, despite the fact they destroy them at the end and they sort of turn into shadows or something. Also, I'm sure it was on purpose, they couldn't help but sneak in a little side-by-side of Yang and Blake on the train, which actually gave me Volume 6 flashbacks, but that was cool. And so then we get to the weirdness of this episode, where we start seeing what happens when they start affecting the dream, because this is a positive change. And it's that weird confronting thing for Weiss, where she goes to the boardroom, as always, and expects to hear that the train isn't making it, as always, and then the train is making it. So despite that being what she wants, that's suddenly confronting and weird, and she's confused by it. And then I actually like the rationality her brain cooks up of, oh, what if the train is full of White Fang? And then we get what I think is one of the main things that comes up across this show, but definitely in this episode, is throughout this entire thing, they constantly repeat about how much of a crushing responsibility Weiss feels. Every single character that she runs into who's cooked up by her in the dream, all of her family members, just keep repeating, oh, what a, great responsibility you have. You have a big choice to make. What responsibility on you, Weiss? Just over and over and over and over again. The only thing she hears over and over again is, you're not worthy to be a Schnee. How can you call yourself worthy to be a Schnee? What great responsibility you have. It's just, get that feeling of that oppressive feeling. That's how she sees her life. That's how she thinks is expected of her. That's the standard she has to hold herself to. And in this episode, we explore some of the things that she feels she has to sacrifice to do that, and that's very interesting. It's a really good bit of this character explanation that this whole sort of side project is for Weiss. It's really cool. And what else is interesting is that Weiss suddenly knows Blake's name. She was always just referred to as that lady in black who keeps popping up. But suddenly here, when I guess it's needed, and perhaps it might just be jogged out of her memory, she knows Blake's name. She sees Blake on the train, she says something about Blake, she says that she will show Blake that even once she lets them into the city won't change, and her family got on her for letting a Faunus in because, of course, at the last moment she does open up the gates. What I think is really interesting is we start crossing that weird boundary between what is dream and what is reality here, because they're approaching the gate, and obviously Weiss can't hear them in that sense. They're all going, oh, please, I hope she opens the gate, but Blake yells out, don't shut us out, Weiss. And then there's realization that crosses Weiss's face across the distance, and suddenly she opens up the gate. And it's almost like, even despite the fact they're not physically together in the nightmare, it was Blake talking through to Weiss's subconscious. And just like they were hoping that Weiss wouldn't totally shut out Blake when the Faunus thing was revealed, during the Volume 1 stuff we saw, that here again, it's Blake reaching out, saying, don't shut us out. And it's Weiss almost fighting back a little bit just to get them through the door. Just not totally shutting them out, but almost defaulting straight back to taking up defensive action, that kind of thing. And then we get to one of the cooler bits of visuals that we've done, and it's when I said at the start that this is reminding me some of old RWBY. What I mean is that RWBY takes so heavily from other things. There's so much other anime and, video games and things in RWBY that you can see. And here in this episode, there's two influences that really stood out to me. And the first is the shifting city. The whole city starts shifting out of the way and rearranging to let the train through. And all I had was a flashback to Fairy Tale. I believe it's when Gildarts first appears and comes back to the city, it all rearranges to get out of his way because he just explodes whatever's in front of him. That's what came to mind. And then later, there's some very clear Attack on Titan influence, which is pretty fun. Oh, also I wanted to shout out that when they were approaching the gate and everyone was yelling to let them in, I did like that we got an Ice Queen from Jaune. That was fun. I also have to say, it really stood out to me again just how robotic the symbol of Jacques is in this show, how it's just not a character. It's just a looming over face that gives almost robotic responses, and every instance of him around the city is just used to patrol. It's just a security camera. Jacques is just this force that looms over everyone but isn't a person. And that's just reiterated even more in this episode to me. But then we get back to Jaune, because the train gets into the city and they get off the train before it pulls into the station where all the defense is waiting, and they put down a checkpoint and then they send off Jaune to go and rescue the rest of Team Juniper, because, so as far as they know, he shouldn't be detected, and that's cleared up pretty quickly when Jaune walks past a security droid and it just completely lets him pass. So that's good. And what's interesting is, despite the fact Shion said it's a function of the Grimm, that if you've been near the Grimm before, if you've been infected by the Grimm before, when you go back into another nightmare, it doesn't notice you because your heart remembers, so it doesn't pick up on you as alien. However, even though it's not meant to reflect part of Weiss, I do like you can read this in a way being reflective of Weiss, that Jaune, despite being, by all cases, unremarkable, and in this case is not even noticed, it almost misses the value of someone who can go by undetected, who isn't the standout, who isn't noticed, because Jaune creates so much chaos. Jaune gets a lot done in this episode, and does so only by the fact that he goes unnoticed, that he isn't a standout, which is all that Weiss wants to be. Now again, I don't think that's completely intentional, and I don't think that even if it is intentional, it's not meant to be a reflection of Weiss's personality and Weiss's mindset so much. It's a function of the nightmare. But still, you can read it that way. That the reason everything in this episode happened is because someone was able to slip by unnoticed. Someone wasn't well known all over the place. Someone didn't stand out. And all Weiss ever wanted to do was stand out. All she wanted to do was be the best, to be the top of the ladder. Everyone knew who she was. And here we see the value of someone the exact opposite and how much they can get done as well and how they still have so much value. But then we get to the big standout of this episode, which is Jaune gets to the cage. He easily tricks the Klein door to let him in. He puts his shield and sword in the way of the door so it can't close, and he just walks in. But what's interesting is where you expect a prison, what you find locked up in there is not what you would expect. Yes, it's all barred in, but it's lovely in there. It's full of food stalls and warmth and happiness. And it feels so weird, it's not what you expect. You thought these, prisoners in quotes were being mistreated, but really it's nice in there. And all of Team Juniper is so happy to see Jaune and give him warm clothing to help him and comfort him. So then they move on and they find another signpost, one of those pointing every which direction signposts. And Yang's piece is in there, so I guess I was mistaken before and it's just Weiss's piece that's locked up in her office, because it did look like Yang's was as well. So, Yang's piece is here, locked away with all these other things that Weiss put aside. Perhaps it might be speaking to the fact that she might want to be friends with Yang, but is locking that away. But either way, Jaune goes up, takes the piece, and suddenly the sign goes from everything saying stop to everything saying go. And all the happiness and all the childlike things that Weiss feels but also feels she has to lock away, start escaping, which is many, many, many little child Weisses running around, all exclaiming things. I want to be pampered, I want to be happy, I want to play, I want to have fun, all those things. Some of them more selfish, some of them just nice. So all these Weisses break out and start running all over the place, causing havoc like crazy kids. And what's even crazier is it appears in a very lovely little metaphor that it's infectious. They run around and zap things, and everything they zap, including a statue of Jacques and I think it's the grumpy Klein, who's like the military leader. They all suddenly want to play and have fun as soon as they get hit. It's the warm childhood feelings that are infectious and take us over if you let them. But Weiss feels she had to lock away because they were so damaging to who she has to be. Again, all that pressure and weight that she feels. And that was very soul-crushing in a good way. And again, one of those great explorations. So, perhaps as to be expected, also, the rest of Team Juniper seemed pretty pliable. You can pretty much just give them directions and they do it. Just convince them this is what we do. We fight, and they go fight. Except for Pyrrha. And Pyrrha acts very odd this episode. Obviously, it's not really her. But I was always looking forward to seeing what Pyrrha's combat would be like in this show. However, she doesn't fight at all. And very interestingly, the Nora and the Ren go and fight. That's fine. And, they do pretty well and they're fighting. And Jaune is fighting too. And he's doing pretty well, actually. And Pyrrha doesn't fight at all. But when Jaune gets knocked down and he's fine, but Pyrrha is standing there giddily, hopping from foot to foot, and she almost bounces over to him and gives him a handkerchief to wipe his face and look after him. And it's almost as if Weiss sees Pyrrha as coddling him, as looking after him, as waiting on him. As if she were almost a maid or a mother. And I don't think it's looking down on Pyrrha saying she can't fight. It's that her priorities are wrong. And, she is just coddling this guy rather than helping. And whether, again, she thinks it's romance or it's just silliness, either way, it's really odd seeing Pyrrha like this. And she's sort of the dope. He has to grab her hand and pull her out of danger. And I think it's a really interesting way to view that dynamic where Weiss has almost put all the things she respects about Pyrrha and loves about Pyrrha behind this weird emotion that she's not really computing. And so when Jaune's around, that emotion seems to at least take precedent for Pyrrha, and it's a very interesting dynamic, so I'm wondering where it goes. I'm still hoping we get to see a fight eventually. Maybe if Jaune gets really hurt or something, we can see that. It'd be really cool. And this is where we get our Attack on Titan references, because it appears all the little Weisses get very big and start, like, destroying buildings. They're kaiju child Weisses. It's a very strange concept. And they still say they want to play and stuff, although they're much more looming and heavy and weighty. And the nightmare seems to clamp down really hard. And it infects Ren, and it infects Nora, and it really clamps down on all the mechs and sends them to attack. And Jaune and Pyrrha are in a bad spot. And then they get saved. Except they get saved by Weiss becoming Thor, it seems. She calls down the heavens. She has electricity crackling around her body like a Super Saiyan. She changes the weather. She morphs the statue of Nicholas into a six-arm defending robot that can punch the ground and grab things. She does disperse the enemies and threats, but it's insane. And she says that they're about to be judged, and that's our cliffhanger we leave on. And again, it's, whether it's ego or whether it's what she wants to be, it's very clear that Weiss in this reality, especially if given time, is incredibly powerful. And, it's almost a good thing that Winter is just in a book and handing out judgment, because I wouldn't want to know what Winter can do. It makes me even more excited to hopefully see Pyrrha fight. But, given how highly that Weiss seems to put Pyrrha on a pedestal still. But the amount of power displayed here is great. Again, that's things you'd never see in normal RWBY. Even, changing the weather, that kind of thing. Even then, it's only black clouds sort of thing when Salem is around, although those are very real. But here, it's godlike powers almost, which again, maybe she thinks too highly of herself, or maybe she just wants to be this powerful one day and thinks she should be. But it's such a crazy scale difference that I'm really hoping that by the climax we can see some insane things. And also, the entire landscape just changed. So Nicholas, which they need to get into, that big statue is now completely changed form and is on high defense. The nightmare seems to be cracking down on them. Ren and Nora seem out for the count. So things aren't going well. So I guess we'll have to see for next episode. But there is a few more things to talk about. What I thought was really interesting was the confusing signs. We had two instances where they changed. Now one was taking out of a Yang's relic, and that one changed. Although the other one was when they positively changed the dream, changing the fact that the train made it to its destination. The road sign, the confused road sign before that also changed. And, reflecting that these positive changes to the dream, things that the dreamer sees as positive, still conflicted the emotions of Weiss. It still played into her mind, and those confusions aren't just in one place. They sort of shift and grow and change while remaining confused, which is another thing that I really like here. I really think there's interesting stuff we're doing with Blake reaching through to Weiss. I really think we're getting some cool conceptual ideas, like with the childlike Weisses and the Attack on Titan Weisses and the changing architecture and the changing Nicholas, things like that. We're seeing even greater depths of the power of Weiss in this dream, and we're mounting even more of a defense and a threat to the team because, like they said, this might be their last go through. And I think they've used 2 coins already on checkpoints, so they are not in the best place. And they only have 3 coins each, so totaling 12. And it's definitely something that stood out to me this episode, that they made so much progress. Like, they did a lot this episode. They got a long way, which is warning signs, because it's only episode 7. This is a 12-episode series, so there's still 5 more of these, which means if they made this much progress, I still think there's a chance they fail again, and that Weiss is going to be right on death's door and they're going to have no time and have to dive back in one last time for a final assault, within the last hour of Weiss's lifespan or something. Because I think they made too much progress and also got a massive setback, and now the landscape's totally changed to be totally against them. They're not in the hiding, and they have just what seems like an insurmountable task ahead of them, and we're only at episode 7, so as far as ramping things up, I think it's doing it really nicely as well. Definitely has me hooked in to want to see the next episode, and these are doing a really good job at that. So I think that's all for now. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, please leave us a like and a comment and all those things. Let me know what you thought. And until next time, my name is Rhaegar, hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.